The security camera at our front door recorded 14 minutes and 22 seconds of me standing in the rain. 7 months pregnant, with my suitcase tipping over on the porch. I know because 2 days later, I watched it with his mother. And the timestamp burned itself into both our memories. My husband, Marcus Brennan, had just told me the baby I was carrying couldn't possibly be his. He'd done the math, he said. He'd checked the calendar. And the science, according to him, didn't lie. Then he'd handed me my coat, set my bag outside, and locked the deadbolt from the inside while I stood there with my hand on my stomach, feeling our daughter kick against my palm. It was 9 o'clock on a Thursday night in November. The porch light was motion activated, and every time I moved, it lit me up like I was on a stage. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stood there in the cold, doing the only thing I knew how to do under pressure. I counted. Weeks backward. Dates forward. Every doctor's appointment. Every blood test. Every moment of this pregnancy that Marcus had been present for until the second. His brother whispered something in his ear that turned my husband into a stranger. What Marcus didn't know, what his whole family didn't know, is that I'm a medical records coordinator for a genetics lab. I spend 40 hours a week managing DNA tests, paternity results, and genetic screenings. I know how to read a lab report better than most doctors. And I know exactly what happens when someone orders a test they don't understand. 2 days after he locked that door, a certified envelope arrived at his mother's house. Inside was a DNA report Marcus had ordered in secret, trying to prove I'd been unfaithful. Instead, it proved something else entirely. Something that would unravel his mother's 30-year lie and prove, beyond any doubt, that the baby was his. But it would also prove that Marcus wasn't his. Welcome back to Revenge Camera Stories, where the cameras don't forget and the DNA never lies. I'm Elena Brennan, and I'm 31 years old. This is the story of the husband who locked me out while I was pregnant, and the genetic test that destroyed his mother's secret before it could destroy me. If you've ever been accused of something that science could disprove, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. For 48 hours, I stood on the outside of a marriage I'd built for 6 years. Marcus never imagined I would be the one holding the evidence that proved everything. And his mother never imagined the DNA test her son ordered would be the one thing that exposed what she'd been hiding since the day he was born. Let me tell you how I ended up on that porch. Because the locked door wasn't where this started. It started 3 weeks earlier, with a calculator and a calendar, and my brother-in-law's voice in Marcus's ear. I'm a medical records coordinator at GenePath Labs, a private genetic testing facility in Portland, Oregon. I make $68,000 a year managing patient files, coordinating paternity tests, processing genetic screening panels, and making sure every DNA sample that comes through our door is handled with the kind of precision that holds up in court. I know what a chain of custody looks like. I know how to read an allele chart. I know the difference between a 99.9% probability and a 99.99% probability. And I know that DNA doesn't care about your feelings. It just tells you what's true. Marcus and I met in college. He was studying finance. I was in my first year of the medical records program. We got married at 25, bought a small house in Southeast Portland, and spent 5 years building the kind of quiet, stable life that doesn't make for good stories. Until I got pregnant. We'd been trying for 8 months. I'd tracked ovulation, taken the tests, done everything by the book. When the test finally came back positive in April, Marcus cried. Real tears. He put his hand on my stomach when there was nothing to feel yet and said, "We're going to be parents." For 6 months, it was perfect. He came to every appointment. He painted the nursery. He assembled the crib and read parenting books and argued with me about names. Then his brother, Derek, came to visit. Derek is 2 years older than Marcus, recently divorced, and the kind of man who measures his worth by tearing down everyone else's. He showed up in early November for what was supposed to be a weekend visit and ended up staying for a week. On the 6th night, I went to bed early 7 months pregnant and exhausted. When I woke up at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom, I heard them in the kitchen. Derek's voice, low and certain. I'm just saying, man, have you done the math? Like, really done it. I stood in the hallway, one hand on the wall. Marcus's voice, uncertain. What math? When did she tell you she was pregnant? April, right? Count backward. That puts conception around late. March, weren't you in Denver? For that conference the whole last week of March? Silence. I'm not saying she did anything. I'm just saying, bro, you were gone. And she was here alone. You sure the timing lines up? I wanted to walk into that kitchen. I wanted to say that conception dates aren't exact. That sperm can live 4 days. That I'd gotten pregnant the night before he left for Denver. On March 21st, when we'd had sex on the couch while watching a movie neither of us remembers the name of. But I didn't. Because I'd learned in my job that once someone starts doubting, facts don't fix it. Only proof does. And the only proof that would satisfy. Derek and apparently Marcus was a DNA test. So I went back to bed and I waited. 3 days later, Marcus asked me to take a paternity test. He didn't ask it like a question. He asked it like a man who'd already decided I'd say no. Elena, he said, standing in the doorway of the nursery while I folded onesies. I need to know for sure. I looked up at him. Know what for sure? That the baby is mine. I set down the onesie I was holding. A small yellow one with ducks on it. You need a DNA test to know that. Derek said. I don't care what Derek said. If you want a paternity test, Marcus, get one. But understand something. The second you ask for it, you're telling me you don't trust me. And I can't know that. He shifted his weight. Looked at the floor. I just want to be sure. Then be sure, I said quietly. Order the test. I'll take it. But when it comes back proving the baby is yours, we're going to have a very different conversation about what kind of marriage this is. He nodded once and left the room. I finished folding the onesies with hands that didn't shake. Because I'd spent 6 years learning to stay calm. When people doubted things I knew were true. But I also opened my laptop and I sent an email to my supervisor at GenePath Labs. Not to interfere. Not to manipulate. To understand. Because Marcus was about to order a test he didn't fully comprehend. And I wanted to know exactly what that test would say before he did. Marcus ordered the paternity test through an online service that promised 99.9% accuracy, discrete processing, results in 3 to 5 business days. It cost him $299 and came with a cheek swab kit and a prepaid envelope. I know because this service he used contracts through GenePath Labs for processing. And while I couldn't access his specific file, that would be a violation. I could see that a test had been ordered. And I could see the service agreement. The kit arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus handed it to me without ceremony. Just a cheek swab, he said. Takes 5 seconds. I swabbed the inside of my cheek with a sterile applicator and sealed it in the labeled tube. Marcus did the same. We put both tubes in the envelope and he mailed it the next morning. Then we waited. In those 5 days, Marcus barely spoke to me. He slept on the couch. He avoided the nursery. Derek stayed for 3 more days. And the 2 of them went out for drinks twice. Coming home smelling like beer and certainty. I spent those 5 days doing what I do best, managing records. I pulled my own medical file from my OB's office. Every ultrasound, every blood test, every measurement of the baby's growth, all time-stamped and dated, all pointing to a conception window of March 20th to 24th. I pulled my work calendar, showed Marcus had left for Denver on March 23rd, came back March 29th. I pulled my phone's location data, showed I'd been home every single night he was gone. I didn't do this because I thought I'd need to defend myself. I did it because I knew that in the world of genetic testing, there are things people don't expect. And when those things show up, you'd better have a timeline that holds up. The lockout. The results came back on a Thursday. Marcus got the email at 6:47 p.m. I know because I was standing in the kitchen, making dinner when his phone buzzed and I watched. His whole face change. He opened the email, read it, read it again. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. "You need to leave," he said. I set down the spatula. "What?" The test came back. "The baby isn't mine." The words didn't make sense. Not scientifically. Not mathematically. Not in any version of reality I understood. "That's impossible," I said. "It's right here." He held up his phone. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0, Elena. You want to explain that? I reached for the phone. He pulled it back. "Let me see the report," I said. My voice steady in the way it gets when I'm reading. A chart and something doesn't add up. "I don't need you to see it. I need you to leave." "Marcus, I work in a genetics lab. Let me see the actual report. Not just the summary email. The full. Get out." He said it quietly. That was the worst part. No yelling. No rage. Just cold, flat certainty. I'm 7 months pregnant. With someone else's baby. "Marcus, listen to me. Something is wrong with that test. Let me see the. Get out." He grabbed my coat from the closet. My overnight bag from the bedroom. He packed it himself, shirts, pants, my toiletries. Everything thrown in without care. Then he opened the front door, set the bag on the porch, and pointed. I walked to the threshold, turned back. "If you lock this door," I said, "I'm not going to beg you to open it. I'm going to prove you wrong. And when I do, you're going to have to live with what you just did." He closed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide into place, and I stood there on my own porch, under a motion-activated light, with my daughter kicking inside me and a phone in my pocket that had more proof than Marcus would ever let himself see. I pulled out my phone, opened the security camera app we'd installed 6 months ago for safety, and I watched myself standing there, live from the camera mounted above the door. I took a screenshot, time-stamped 9:08 p.m., November 14th. Then I called the one person I knew would understand what a bad DNA result actually meant. I called my supervisor. And then I called Marcus's mother. The call to Diane. Diane Brennan answered on the third ring. "Elena, it's late, honey. Is everything?" "Marcus just locked me out of the house," I said, calm as a weather report. "He says the paternity test came back showing the baby isn't his." Silence, long and cold. "That's ridiculous," Diane said finally. "Of course, the baby is his." "I know. But the test he ordered says otherwise, and he won't let me see the actual report. Just the summary. Which means something went wrong with the sample or the lab, or you're lying," said a voice in the background, Derek. Diane's voice went sharp. "Derek, go upstairs." I heard footsteps. A door closing. "Where are you right now?" Diane asked. "Standing on the porch. In the rain. With my suitcase." She sucked in a breath. "He locked you outside. While you're pregnant." "Yes." "Does he know you're calling me?" "No, but Diane, I need you to do something for me. When the actual DNA report arrives in the mail, the physical copy, it's going to come to his address. But there's a chance the Service will send a duplicate to the billing. Address if it's different. Did Marcus use his credit card or yours? A pause. He used mine. Said he didn't want it showing up on your joint account. There it was. Then the duplicate is going to come to you. When it does, don't let Marcus see it first. Call me immediately because I think there's something in that report that's going to explain everything. And it's not what he thinks it is. What do you mean? I mean, I work in genetics. Diane and a 0% paternity. Result in a case where I know I've been. Faithful means one of two things. Either the sample was contaminated, or there's a genetic anomaly that the test flagged incorrectly. And if it's the second one, it's going to show up in the full report, not just the summary email. Diane was quiet for a long moment. You think something's wrong with the test. I know something's wrong with the test. I just need to see the full results to know what. Where are you going to stay tonight? I'll get a hotel. I'll be fine. No, Diane said, and her voice had that tone. The mother voice that doesn't negotiate. You're coming here. Pack your bag. I'm texting you the address. And Elena. Yeah? When that report comes, we're reading it together. And if my son locked you out of your own home while you're carrying his baby, there's going to be hell to pay. I hung up and looked back at the door. At the camera above it, still recording, I picked up my bag. And I left. But I didn't leave without taking one more screenshot. This time of the door locked from the outside. Time-stamped, date-stamped, saved to the cloud. Because in my line of work, I'd learned that the truth isn't what people say. It's what the records show. And I was about to build a record that would stand up in any court, any family meeting, and any conversation where Marcus tried to rewrite what happened tonight. I drove to Diane's house in the rain, 40 minutes north to a neighborhood where the houses were older and the trees blocked out the streetlights. She was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, and she didn't say a word. She just took my bag and led me inside to the guest room that still had Marcus's high school photos on the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed and she sat next to me. And for the first time since the door locked, I cried. Not because I was sad, because I was so angry I couldn't hold it in anymore. He didn't even let me explain, I said. He just believed the test. He believed Derek. Diane's jaw tightened. Derek has been poisoned since the divorce. He's miserable, and he wants Marcus to be miserable too. Do you believe me? I asked. That the baby is Marcus's. She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached over and put her hand on my stomach, where her granddaughter was kicking against my ribs. I've known you for 6 years. Elena, you don't lie. And my son is a fool if he can't see that. She stood. Get some rest. The report will be here in a day or two. When it comes, we'll figure out what went wrong. But I couldn't rest, because I kept thinking about the 0% result and what could cause it. So I opened my laptop, and I started looking. The research. Here's what most people don't understand about DNA testing. A paternity test doesn't. Just compare the baby's DNA to the father's. It looks at specific genetic markers, usually 16 to 24 of them, and checks how many the baby inherited from each parent. If the baby shares enough markers with the alleged father, the probability of paternity is 99.9% or higher. If they share none, it's 0%. But there are rare cases, vanishingly rare, where a biological father can test as 0% paternity. It's called chimerism. It happens when a person absorbs their twin in utero and ends up with 2 sets of DNA in their body. Most of the time, people never know. But if the DNA in their cheek cells is different from the DNA in their sperm, a paternity test using a cheek swab will come back negative, even though the child is biologically theirs. It's so rare that most labs don't even screen for it. But I'd processed 3 cases of it in my 4 years at GenePath. I knew what it looked like in a report. And I knew that if Marcus had chimerism, the full lab report would show mismatched markers in a very specific pattern. I pulled up my work email, sent a message to my supervisor. Hypothetical. If a paternity test comes back 0%, but the mother is certain of fidelity, what would you look for in the raw data too? Rule out chimerism or sample contamination. She replied within an hour. Chimerism would show inconsistent exclusions across markers. Contamination would show mixed alleles. Why? You got a weird case. I typed back. Not a case. A husband. Her next message was 1 line. If he ordered the test without you, get the full report. Not just the summary. The summary won't show the markers. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. If Marcus had chimerism if his cheek. DNA didn't match his sperm. DNA then the test he'd ordered had just told him he wasn't the father of his own biological child. And if that was true, then there was something else in his genetics that he didn't know about. Something his mother might. The next morning, I called my OB's office and asked them to run a standard genetic screening panel on the baby. Not because I thought something was wrong, because I wanted to see if the baby had inherited any genetic markers that would show up in Marcus's family line. Dr. Patel's nurse called me back that afternoon. Elena, the panel came back. Everything's normal, but there's one flag I wanted to mention. The baby has a genetic marker for factor V Leiden thrombophilia. It's a clotting disorder. Not dangerous in most cases, but it means one of the parents is a carrier. I sat very still. I was tested for that 2 years ago. I'm not a carrier. Then it came from the father. Factor V Leiden is autosomal dominant. If the baby had it, Marcus had it. And if Marcus had it, one of his parents had it. I thanked the nurse and hung up. Then I called Diane. Has Marcus ever been tested for clotting disorders? I asked. No, why? Because the baby has a genetic marker that came from him. It's called factor V Leiden. It's inherited, which means Marcus has it. And he got it from you or his father. Diane went quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. His father didn't have it, she said finally. I had him tested years ago for something else clean. Then you have it. I don't. The silence stretched. Diane, I said carefully. If you don't have it, and Marcus's father didn't have it, and Marcus does, then stop. Her voice was sharp, final. We'll talk when the report comes. Not before. She hung up. I sat in the guest room with the high school photos on the wall and a new, terrible understanding settling over me. If Marcus had factor V Leiden, and neither of his parents carried it, then one of 2 things was true. Either it was a spontaneous mutation, which is vanishingly rare, or Marcus's father wasn't his biological father. And Diane had just told me to stop talking. The envelope arrived on Saturday morning. Certified mail. Thick and official, with GenePath Lab's return address in the corner. Diane called me at 8 a.m. It's here. Don't open it without me, I said. I'm coming over. I drove the 40 minutes in 25. And when I walked into her kitchen, the envelope was sitting on the table like a bomb. Diane had coffee made. She poured 2 cups, sat down, didn't touch the envelope. Before we open this, she said, I need to tell you something. I waited. Marcus's father, Richard, he wasn't. We had trouble conceiving. For years. And when I finally got pregnant, it was through a fertility clinic. Artificial insemination. We used a donor. I set my coffee down. Does Marcus know? No. Does Richard know?